Today's video is brought to you by Rocket Money. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever looked at your bill and wondered, whoa, something's not right here? Have you ever looked at the amount of money you have in your bank account and you wondered, whoa, there should be a lot more? And then you open up the little breakdown and you realize, whoa, what's all these subscription services I've got going on? Yeah, sometimes you sub to something and you forget it, or sometimes you're getting billed more than you think you do. And that's where Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel your subscriptions, lower your bills, and helps you manage your money better. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to safely and securely identifying which bills are recurring and which ones you need to be canceling, Rocket Money comes over there and helps you cancel them literally from within the app if you needed to. But one thing that's even more impressive about this is literally if you send them a photo of your bill and you tap a couple buttons, Rocket Money will literally negotiate the bills for you. That's where Rocket Money can also come in and help you out. Literally something my dad used to ask me to do, I tell him to go to Rocket Money now. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year. And with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions, let's put your bills on top of that too. To save more and spend less, join over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. So go over to rocketmoney.com/ordinarygamers or click the link in the description to get started for free. And you can even unlock even more features with premium as well. That's rocketmoney.com/ordinarygamers to get started for free. That said, let's head over to the video. Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today we're taking a look down the horrific true crime rabbit holes. Now you might be wondering, Muta, what takes you down a rabbit hole like this? And as somebody that has looked at some of the wildest, some of the creepiest stuff on the internet, I will always say that the scariest stuff is always what human beings do to each other. So today's video is about the Setagaya family murders. So for anybody that doesn't know what this is actually one of the oldest cold cases ever. It's actually a cold case ranging back to the year 2000, where tens of thousands of pieces of evidence have been grabbed, hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers have investigated it, and to this day, nobody has actually been captured. And it's a pretty grisly tale where literally the story really is compounded by the fact that the person left behind so much evidence at this point that normally you would expect anyone would catch them. But so far, they've basically lived the rest of their lives and will continue to, unfortunately, in peace. So in order to understand the story for what it really is, you have to go all the way back to the year 2000 and around December 30th to December 31st. So around the, beginning of the new year, most people in Japan expected, yeah, you know what, this is the start of the new millennium. If you lived in Tokyo, however, you probably came across headlines that were talking about a serious case of murder occurring. So around in this location of Tokyo, in this one small suburb in the city. Now this home belonged to Mikio and Yasuko Miyazawa, and of course their daughter Nina and their son Rei, who were literally less than the ages of 10 at the time. Now this whole family lived pretty much in peace, and around them was, just what you would expect out of any suburban neighborhood, okay? They had a park for children to play at, a skateboard park right over here, and of course, multiple parks. Now, again, this is from current day, but this home remains as a testament to one of Japan's most unsolved murder cases, and one of the cases that the Tokyo Metropolitan Police have poured tons of their time, resources into. Nowadays, if you look at the actual street view for this house, it looks like an ordinary Japanese neighborhood, but again, if you look carefully at the house, what has effectively happened is a whole bunch of barricades have been put up. It's pretty much been kept there in its original condition, right? You can start to see some overgrowth take over. And the reason for those big orange gates is because, unfortunately, children do actually break into places like this. I think 10 high school children broke into it earlier. That's not to say this still isn't an active investigation zone, because it very much is. To this day, Tokyo Metropolitan Police actually want to really solve this case. Now, while footage of this house actually exists, and it was posted by the Asahi Shimbun Company, where they were actually showcasing this house in particular, you can see boxes, you can see the news media kind of covering it, and again, they're in front of a lot of the windows where, things were alleged to be broken into, right? Like the actual assailant had come in. It's a pretty scary scenario. It's a pretty, harrowing footage to watch. And of course, to understand this, there is a map that I found on the internet, and of course somebody machine translated this so you can see a floor plan of the home. The most like common account of this, the most like widely recounted like version, is that at one point during the night between 30th and 31st of December, so typically the moment between 11:30 p.m. and 12:05 a.m. Japanese Standard Time, so a period of 35 minutes, is when these murders had been alleged to occur. So according to this entire diagram, what happened was the assailant broke into the second floor of the house, so this small window right over here, and through the small window they navigated to the first kid's room, where the son Ray was first killed by actual strangulation. Now, of course, at one point going downstairs, the husband Mikio was then murdered, and this is where, like, obviously there was a bit of a, I guess you could say, a resistance. The actual death in this case was stabbing, and of course, at one point, like, a part of a sashimi knife was literally lodged into Mikio's skull. So the mom and the daughter were staying apparently in the attic, to where they were actually met up with, attacked with the broken knife, the sashimi knife, and as they were escaping, or at least moving towards the second floor, they were then fatally killed in this situation. So 3 people were murdered via stabbing, and 1 person, the son, was killed via strangulation. So a truly grisly set of murders had occurred in this scenario, and what had happened after is where the story really gets insane, where the rabbit hole really gets wild. Now, according to the Japanese Metropolitan Police investigation, the actual assailant, who still to this day has remained unknown because it's a cold case, literally was in the house for apparently several hours before disappearing. I mean, we're talking so much evidence that he had left behind his fecal matter, to where the law enforcement literally were able to grab what they had eaten out of that fecal matter. The guy took a shit in the toilet of this household and did not flush it. According to Japan Today, the police forensic team that combed through the Miyazawa house found that the killer had left behind so many clues, and his apprehension was likely to be just a matter of time. The police went so far as to determine what the killer had eaten in the previous meal, something containing string beans and sesame seeds, known because he stayed around long enough to use the Miyazawa's toilet to have a bowel movement. So yeah, it's one of these scenarios where people were able to identify, like the law enforcement were able to look, this guy left behind evidence, and that wasn't just the worst part. He had left behind a whole set of clothes that law enforcement to this day still share in their actual write-ups of this case. So one of the actual posts from the actual Tokyo Metropolitan Police's flyer that you can view right now literally talks about the murder and robbery of a family of 4 in Setagaya. So police are still looking for the killer. So what they had said was the murders occurred just before the new year on the night of December 30th, 2000, at the residence of the Miyazawa family in 2326 Kami Shoshigaya 3 Chome. So as they describe who was murdered, literally it was this family that, literally looked like they were just a standard howdy-doody suburban family. And of course, this is an image of what their house would look like. I assume because of the quality of this imagery, what it looked like on the day of, or like around that time period. Of course, these are aerial photography pieces from December 30th, 2000, where you can see, the parks, and you can see the skate park, you can see the various parks. It was literally like their house was just like the sole house in that area, right? Everyone else is like all suburbanized in this area, but these guys just have their whole area. I mean, shit, they literally live right next to this like big baseball diamond. It's crazy. So literally to this day, they have a current reward of 20 million yen. So again, if you have any actual evidence that could assist the Japanese police, and again, this would be to my audience in Japan that probably have known about this stuff back in the year 2000, so I would probably say, not a good chance. You can earn up to $20 million and put 20 million yen and put somebody behind serious bars. So according to this situation, the killer left behind a lot of things on the scene. So what the police were able to say was the killer was relatively young, based on the clothing, around 170 centimeters tall, wore large-sized clothes, wore a pair of 27.5 centimeter sized shoes, and then of course was slim and was probably right-handed. So based on the blood stains taken from the scene, yes, there was blood actual evidence, the killer is a male, the blood type is type A, and he probably injured his hand during the commission of the murder, but the wounds may have disappeared by now. His body shape may have also changed over time. So the evidence that he left behind was, for instance, this whole getup right over here. I mean, literally he left behind an entire set of clothing and a full-on like fanny pack. So if you look carefully, the hat over here, they were able to identify that a total of this hat in particular, 3,465 of this kind were on sale nationwide between July 1998 and November 2000, and were sold for around 1,900 yen. So based on the seal tag, it's believed that this hat was sold after September 21st, 1999. So they had kind of an idea about the general destination of sale. They had an idea of when it would have been sold. And of course, then they looked at the jacket, for instance, over here, where they traced it to Uniqlo direct run stores. And of course, they've got a muffler and a scarf. So again, they said the information on the manufacturer, retails have not been obtained, as there was no tag. It is 130 centimeters by 30 centimeters, acrylic made, and green base with red, black, orange, dark green checks. They've got a pair of gloves, they've got shoes, and then they've got a hip bag, handkerchiefs, Drakkar Noir perfume, and of course a kitchen knife sold under the trade name of Seki Magoroku Ginju. A total of 1,500 sashimi knives of this kind were manufactured in the Fukui Prefecture in June 2000, and they were sold for around 3,500 yen each in 46 outlets in the Kanto region. So just based off of these items alone, the reason I'm getting so verbose like the police is you would think that somebody would be able to track down, maybe a buyer for some of these specific articles of clothing and items at some point. But no one ever did. I mean, people were able to apparently go into the hip bag and found sand that was traced back to Edwards Air Force Base in California, and of course a skate park in Japan, where Mikio had apparently been arguing with skateboarders near the house. So that one skate park that I showed you towards the beginning when we were doing the flyover of their actual home. I mean, there is so much evidence that is present over here that one immediately thinks, why couldn't they find the guy? And of course, if you go back to the actual police docket, you can see that, again, one of the items they specifically pull out is a shirt. So they point out that the stores that sold the same type of sweatshirt used by the killers have been identified. Do you know anyone who might have bought this sweatshirt? So then they show this photo of a shirt with white, the white core and the purple arms. And they said that at some point it was sold between August 2000 and December 2000. It was sold to Marufuru Corporation, whose stores are unfortunately currently closed. And of course, they go on the colors, the size. They even find 130 pieces sold. Purchasers for 12 of those have actually been identified. I mean, that's how cold this case has gotten, where we're looking at the purchase records of these shirts and trying to identify who it could be based off of that. I mean, they were able to identify sales in actual regions, down to the specific count. That's how far this investigation had gone. Because like I said, hundreds of thousands, I think it was 244,000 plus police officers and investigators actually touched this story at one point. They even brought up this one Buddhist statue, the Ojizo-san, which was found on the opposite side of the river that was, around their house. And of course the Senkawa River, which again, it is not known whether someone placed it with good intentions or the killer or someone close to the killer placed it there. We are looking for information on manufacture, import, and sales of this Ojizo-san. So again, everything that the Japanese police are going towards, they're trying to look up for everything that they can find in this story. I mean, they even provided a TV schedule of things between 9 p.m. to 11 a.m. between December 30th and December 31st, okay? Does this remind you of anything strange? And again, it's all what the Japanese police or the Tokyo police have really tried to put out in order to find this one killer. Now, one thing the Tokyo Metropolitan Police will proudly say is, no matter what, the department will never give up until this case is solved, because it caused such a national fervor and an international fervor because of the weird, complex nature of it. So again, even looking further into this, beyond all of it, the police had even come across not just the actual contents of what this person ate in their fecal matter, they looked through the blood, but they also identified some of the items were purchased in a local region. So the entire night of the murder, it was estimated that the guy had remained in the house for either a period of 2 or maybe 10 hours. And the reason they had figured this out was apparently the family computer had connected to the internet at one point. Now, after the murders, the assailant literally was in the house. He drank around 4 bottles of barley tea, had some melon, ate some of the ice cream around, literally also used the toilet, which is how the fecal matter was left behind because they never flushed their feces down. And of course, they also literally used the first aid kits and, sanitary septic products in order to treat a wound that they apparently had. The wound that I would assume would be on one of the hands. So they even apparently may have taken a nap at some point on one of the sofas in the second floor living room. Now, whether this is true or not, it's really hard to figure out, and there's plenty of podcasts that are available that kind of touch upon this a little bit. One of them notably being the Faceless podcast, which is literally several episodes that cover this entire situation, right? This grisly case. Now, the reason why people were kind of looking at how long they stayed in the house was because of the times that, Mikio's computer had connected to the internet. So in this entire situation, the killer was lingering at the crime scene, and according to the police at the time, he surfed the internet on Miyazawa's computer. And also, again, alongside raiding their fridge for the barley tea and the ice cream and shitting in their toilet, he was at the place, right? And he left behind, again, not just his fingerprints, but also DNA in the form of blood and feces. And of course, shoe prints and those personal items. So because of all of this evidence, law enforcement thinks, sure, maybe we're going to get a catch. But what they didn't have at the time, apparently, was witnesses. And I believe there were only about 2 witnesses out there. So in this one article from Medium, on Medium that I saw, where they talked about the Setagaya family murder, they had said, again, witnesses weren't really spotted. They actually only had 2 sightings of this guy after the kill. The first one apparently came from a woman who claimed that she was near the crime scene driving a vehicle, sometime after 11:30. Suddenly, she spotted a man who rushed out of the Miyazawa's house neighborhood and jumped before her car. He managed to evade her vehicle and ran away. That information was then dismissed by the police since they didn't find any signs of blood on the street. So from this one article in 2020, they actually went over an account of an individual that had spotted a man near one of the actual stations at Nikko City, Tochigi Prefecture. So there was an investigation where, again, the evening after the incident, a station employee was hand-assuming a man, again, this is a machine translation, who had a hand injury at the Higashikoku station in Nikko City, Tochigi Prefecture. However, I can't shed blood and take the train. The investigation was postponed, and about 10 months after the investigators went to the site, the man who received the bruise had not yet been identified. So a former investigator who is a member of the Special Search Headquarters said, "We are most afraid that humans who listen to us and decide that they are not criminals will be arrested later. I made it clear it is possible that field investigators would not have overlooked the criminal if they took this time, even a fingerprint." So yeah, there's a lot to criticize with the Japanese police, but nobody really expected a case that had all this evidence to not eventually be a slam dunk. It really was the fact that after all this evidence, nobody was able to identify or see any shady activity. There was no eyewitnesses to work off of. And the ones that existed, unfortunately, their accounts had to be, completely ignored because once the police had tried to compare it to the evidence they had, it just didn't make any sense, as we talked about with the woman at the very beginning, the first account. In 2015, one of the actual relatives of the family members, the mom that was slayed in this situation, Irie, actually ended up jumping in and actually filed a complaint against the nation's TV watchdog, claiming that TV Asahi's program, their documentary on that unsolved case, actually misrepresented her. See, what they had actually said was they brought a former member of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation to find, who the suspect could be through the use of careful profiling, right? So what profiling is, just for a quick understanding for anybody that doesn't know, is a method the FBI has created to detect and classify major personality and characteristics that behavior is shown for individuals, basically upon analyzing the crime. If you look at what has happened in a crime, an FBI profiler's job is to kind of figure out who that person could be based on their behaviors and patterns, and then cross-reference that with people who exhibit those behaviors or patterns. And one thing that they use this profiling for is to figure out what a possible motive can be. So according to the actual complaint, the program employed staging, editing, and other means to misrepresent her as supporting the former investigator's view that the family was murdered by an acquaintance bearing a strong feeling of resentment. And there's no evidence that actually proves any motive make any sense. Now, if you go back to the actual murder, what actually got stolen even, right? So according to the actual motive of theft over here, when it looked around for money, it seemed like the money wasn't really something that this assailant was going after, because there was a point where around $2,000 was found at the actual home. And I think it was something like $1,500 were actually stolen from the actual home at any given moment, right? So if the killer wanted money, they really didn't run away with much to make 4 murders make any sense financially. Not that it ever could, but that's one of the things people had brought up. Now, could it have been somebody that, Mikio had pissed off? Well, there were actually people that thought maybe skateboarders were, somebody that could have been a case. Like, this is again from 2019 when discussing the situation on ABC, where, people had wondered, would it have been a disgruntled skater, for instance? One avenue of investigation looked at whether Mikio had been seen arguing with skaters at a nearby park in the lead up to the murders. The killer's clothing and suspected age, which at the time was around like 18 to 45, and that got revised to like 18 to 35, and I think now it's 18 to 24. It literally could have been a disgruntled skater tired of his constant noise complaints who decided, I'm going to kill a family, right? I mean, it's kind of out there and outlandish, and again, there's no real proper evidence to corroborate that, but it was one of the theories that was brought up. I don't personally think that is true whatsoever, but money didn't get stolen, and it didn't really seem like anybody did it out of foul play, meaning that it wasn't like, he pissed off somebody and that's what it came out to. Now, it was a senseless murder with no real understanding of any kind of real motive. So it added extra wonder, because without a motive, then you really don't know how to pin it on somebody at all, right? Like, you have to understand why somebody would go through that and murder an entire family. If you've got no motive, it makes this already troubling case even more troubling to figure out. But again, there was one other bombshell that blew people away. In 2014, it came out that the family's killer might have even left home at night. See, that range I gave you, like they left the house between 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., was one of those things where law enforcement literally based it off of the internet activity of Mikio's computer. So at some point early on in the morning, around 10 o'clock, the computer had connected to the internet, which may have signified that maybe the killer had used it once again, like they spent the entire night out of their house, which again wouldn't make any sense from a murder perspective. You would think somebody would leave in the cover of the night, but why would they leave in the morning? Well, this is where the actual Tokyo police investigated again. So according to the Metropolitan Police, they were assuming that, again, this is one of those situations where maybe the computer was used in the morning, but what they had found was that the computer's mouse was fallen off the desk, and the machine's event log showed that the second online connection had been terminated after about 4 minutes without a different website being accessed. So going back to that one Medium article where they also looked into this, they had said that what they know for sure is the criminal who was at the house at around 1 a.m. At 1:18, they connected to the internet using Mikio's computer. And during 5 minutes of usage, they created a new folder and visited a theater's website. The site was bookmarked by Mikio, and they don't know their later whereabouts. For years, the public was meant to believe the perpetrator escaped in the morning due to the computer connecting to the internet for a second time around 10 a.m. And of course, it's literally until 2014, when I showed you that big bombshell, that apparently the computer mouse that was found by the police had fallen under the table and connected to Mikio's company's website, which was set as Mikio's homepage. So the Japanese cops ran an experiment using the exact type of Macintosh computer that the Miyazawa family had used, and they concluded the most probable outcome was Yasuko's mother dropping a mouse by accident when she found the bodies and therefore connecting to the internet. Now, this is kind of a little tough for me to understand, because if she came to the house at 10:40 and the internet logs are around 10 a.m., then it doesn't make sense. Like, did a gust of wind maybe come in? And it seems kind of, I'm not saying that it's, it can't happen, but it seems pretty outlandish that if you dropped a mouse right now on like a surface, it would also tap that left mouse button, and your mouse would conveniently also be located. Like, it would have to be placed literally on top of like your internet browsing software just so it can launch and connect to the home page site. That is super weird to me, and I don't really understand how the Japanese police went to it, and understanding how this works, especially in a case that is locked behind a language barrier, makes it a little bit more frustrating, at least for me, to get down into. So at this point, people started to wonder about the actual case, right? Now I'm gonna kind of go into one of the actual I'm gonna go through one of the things in my mind that immediately hit me. Because of that, pack that had the dust from California, it made me wonder if there possibly was a soldier or something of that nature, maybe like an army brat kid, with like an American parent that possibly lived in that area or possibly had committed these murders. Because I think having like a pack with dust that belonged to California is kind of a pretty big thing to be looking at, right? Like, I wouldn't think that that's just circumstantial evidence. If you find literal patterns of dirt from another country, literally across the ocean, that should make you kind of wonder. Maybe the killer at one point went to America. Maybe they came back. I feel like these are things that the police could use to isolate down. So I started to look up local air bases, and I found one known as the Yokota Air Force Base, which is this JSDF base, and of course the US Air Force Base, and of course the Tama area of western Tokyo. So it has been active since 1940 to this day, so it literally matches the time period. And if you bring up the actual map over here, Yokota Air Force Base is literally about 1 hour and 9 minutes from the actual home itself. I'm not saying that obviously the killer went back here, but I would probably start looking into the Air Force bases, especially if I found that dirt from California might have been on somebody. I'm not saying that some serviceman did it, I'm wondering if there might have been a kid that would have been involved. And the reason I'm going into it is that the blood analysis that the law enforcement was checking might have indicated that the person might have had genetics, or maybe, from, they might have actually had genetics outside of Japan. So let's look at that. Now, I don't want to, again, just keep going on to this point, but obviously this is serious speculation on my end, but the reason I would look at the Air Force bases, again, just having dust from the United States, or California at least recorded, should be one of the reasons why at least Tokyo Metropolitan Police could question anybody related to these air bases. And I think with the amount of, actual record keeping they have, maybe it is worth going down this lead. They probably already have tried this, and it maybe just come out completely inconclusive. But yeah, it's just one of the theories that I had, with nothing to really go off of. Maybe there could be somebody related to the army over here, or somebody that might have actually been close to it. That's just based off of that dust information. I think it's too wild of a coincidence to just completely ignore. I mean, this whole story to this day, when you look at it, right, this is just one from 2channel, or one blog, an actual chan from Japan, where they're talking about this house in the year 2021. It's a huge piece of cultural history for Japan, unfortunately. It's kind of like the Zodiac Killer for them. It's a serious cold case that has drawn the ire of national attention and international attention that hasn't been solved. So going back to the whole Medium article over here, where they kind of go into it, they talk about, again, the idea that they had fingerprints, footprints, and again, blood-stained towels, which showed that the person had an A blood type. So again, 5 million people had their fingerprints checked in this entire story. Neighbors, all kinds of criminals, family friends, ex-residents, hospital patients with wounds on their hands, and they literally tried DNA testing with 1.3 million actual tries. And according to this article, all of them have failed. None of those matches came out to be true. But when they looked into it, in 2005, they announced that the perpetrator, the police, said that they most likely had Southern European roots from their mother's side, based on, again, genetic patterns and markers picked up in the blood and the DNA evidence. So again, when they started looking more into it, right, the father was possibly an East Asian individual. Someone that could have been Korean or maybe Chinese. So according to this, Japanese police asked South Korea for help with identifying the culprit. And it was one of the first requests of its kind, and it was refused by the South Korean government. Now, this is one of those things that makes me wonder too. Now, I don't know about the idea of Japanese and South Korean relations. I'm sure that there's tension in between them if you read their geopolitics. But Korea, as far as law enforcement has gone, South Korea and Japan, from my understanding, have helped in plenty of missing persons cases. So again, this is one of those things that also comes out as an oddity for me too. Now, again, when you're doing DNA evidence and you're running against registries, if you're not showing up in a registry, chances are the person you're trying to find isn't on a criminal registry anywhere. And it gets even harder when you're dealing with information that possibly could deal with somebody who's not in your country. So at that moment in time, from my understanding, they had to go to Interpol. So based on the Y chromosome, which showed haplogroup OM122, a common haplogroup distributed in East Asian people, so 1 in 4 or 5 Koreans, 1 in 10 Chinese, and 1 in 13 Japanese, this caused the Tokyo Metropolitan Police to go to the Interpol agencies and see if they could hit against their registries, which again, nothing really tapped into there. So that's how this became one of those cold cases that to this day is pretty it's pretty unknown. It's one that hasn't been solved. There's one game that I play called Shadows of Doubt where you literally have to, go to a crime scene as soon as it happens, gather as much evidence as you can, and come to a logical conclusion on who the killer could be, murder weapons, things of that nature. And obviously that's a video game, and this is reality. But in that video game, it really shows you that as you spend more and more time not figuring out the killer, that evidence that exists at a crime scene gets colder and colder and colder. Information that could have been retained even digitally loses its time over. Even if they find the exact store that this person bought that t-shirt we looked at in the beginning, who's to say that store is active? There's definitely no expectation that they would have any CCTV footage, if they even had a security system, to identify that person. And even if you're looking through sales records, because it's over 20 years ago, there's no expectation that any tax agency would even need you to store that information, unless there's like a specific law for it. It's just that old of a case. Now, it's not like a case that could have happened now, and then in 2040, they could have possibly had some digital fragment of information. Mind you, this is the case in the year 2000, when, people are still getting into the digital age of things. Now, when it comes to this case and its legacy today, even as of March 2024, it was actually this case that brought up the idea for the Japanese Metropolitan Police, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, that they should literally promote investigations that utilize more DNA information than it does now, such as expanding the database on genetic information in DNA for the early resolution of a lot of these cases. This case was so huge in terms of Japanese-like culture that it literally was a cause célèbre, meaning that it was such a big issue that the controversy that it arose, was one of the big reasons, one of the major reasons, one of the, understandable societal reasons that they had abolished the statute of limitations for crimes that could merit the death penalty in Japan. Now, Japan has a death penalty, and, if you commit a heinous crime like this, you're gonna be fucking hanged. So in this situation, right, you can see other, people, like people who ran the Aum Shinrikyo cult, from my understanding, the Aleph cult. One of those, the leaders actually, I think very recently just actually died. Their whole death penalty finally got delivered to them, thankfully, because of the horrific crimes that they committed. But looking into this story in particular, right, obviously, if somebody hasn't been caught, the statute of limitations might let them get away with a crime as heinous as this. So Japan, literally, in regards to any crime that, could lead with the punishment of, death, they wanted to make sure there really isn't a statute of limitation for that. And honestly, I don't think there should ever be a statute of limitations on crimes as heinous as this. Literally, according to Donga.com, they said they campaigned for the abolishment of state of limitations for hideous crimes. Finally, they elicited the revision in 2010 of Japan's laws on criminal procedures, eliminating a 25-year statute of limitations for crimes corresponding to a death penalty. Meaning that the scumbag who did these crimes, who's unfortunately still out at large, maybe even killed other people, is actually an individual that, can in fact go through the death penalty if caught. Now, do I think the Japanese police are going to catch this guy? Honestly, I don't know. All right, wildest things have happened. I mean, literally as of months ago, one of the biggest final remaining drug lords, El Mayo, was literally captured in Texas. A man that eluded any form of photography for literally a decade, 2 decades almost, caught out of nowhere. So honestly, anything can happen. There may be one breakthrough, and there may be one piece of research when it comes to DNA evidence, maybe a new methodology that may shed more light on the situation. And ultimately, maybe would close the books on this. But to this day, this remains one of the world's and Japan's most creepy, unsettling mysteries that existed. A killer that not only killed an entire family, but left behind so much evidence and literally stayed in this house for literally hours, it seems. All to just get away without not a single person actually getting a trace of this guy. It's insane shit. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and if you like today's video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I like doing a bunch of creepy stuff, and sometimes when I come across rabbit holes like this, I do want to share them. So let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it, dislike it. I am out.